Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here, and you are listening to episode 252 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Kevin Robertson is back on the show again today, and in this episode, he gives us a glimpse behind the curtain, so to speak, when it comes to the process of becoming a professional hunter in Zimbabwe, what the training is like to get that certification, and a look at the practical and business side of being a professional hunter and an outfitter in Africa like he was. Now, as you will learn here shortly, there is a whole lot more that goes into that side of things when I'm talking about the training, everything involved that goes into the certification, as well as the business side and getting everything together in order to outfit these hunts for visiting clients. There's a whole lot more involved with that than most people realize, and you will soon understand why those select few people who hold a Zimbabwe professional hunter's license are so proud of their accomplishment. Now, this was not Kevin's first appearance on the show. If you are new to the podcast and you have heard either some or none of his previous episodes, go back and make sure that you listen to episode 97 on Africa hunting bullets, 103 on Africa hunting rifles, 124 and 125 on Cape Buffalo hunting, 154 on leopard hunting, 155 on lion hunting, 176 and 177 on elephant hunting and elephant conservation, 178 on crocodile hunting, 179 on hippo hunting, 205 on hunting with a lever-action rifle in Africa, 206 on classic Africa hunting cartridges, 207 on hyena hunting, and 250 on African hunting trackers. Links to all those episodes are in the show notes to make it easy for you. Now, Kevin is a gifted storyteller and has a lot of knowledge and experience gained from hunting all manner of game in Africa over the course of over 20 years of being a professional hunter there. He gained a lot of notoriety when he wrote the book, The Perfect Shot, which Safari Press initially published in 1999. That was a revolutionary book at the time, and it is still an incredibly useful resource, especially the updated edition that is currently in print, The Perfect Shot 2. If you have an upcoming hunt in Africa, or if you're just dreaming about hunting in Africa one day, or if you just enjoy learning more about animal anatomy and biology, then you need to buy a copy of The Perfect Shot 2. Likewise, if you enjoy these episodes, then you will probably also enjoy Kevin's book, It Shouldn't Happen. And that book is a collection of some of Kevin's more humorous and entertaining stories from hunting and living in Africa. There are several stories in It Shouldn't Happen that made me laugh out loud when I read it. And he's told some of those stories in his interviews with me over the years, but don't worry, there are still plenty of entertaining tales in that book that you've never heard before. Click the link in the show notes or go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/Kevin to pick up a copy of his books for yourself. Finally, make sure you are on my email list. To do that, click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com and sign up for my free ebook on the best hunting cartridges. You'll get that ebook when you sign up, plus you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday. These are entertaining and informative emails about hunting, shooting, ballistics, etc. I get feedback all the time from people telling me how much they enjoy receiving them and how much they look forward to hearing from me every day. So make sure you are getting them too by going to huntingguns101.com. Okay, let's get Kevin on and we'll talk about the process of becoming a professional hunter in Zimbabwe. Okay, well, Kevin, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. We are talking about how to become a professional hunter in Zimbabwe today. And just like how African trackers are an important part of African safari lore, the same is also true of the professional hunter. And there's lots of countries in Africa where someone can have a great safari with an outstanding professional hunter. However, for all the problems that country has had over the past few decades, Zimbabwe still has a reputation for being one of the most difficult countries to obtain a professional hunter's license in. So for that reason, along with the fact that you spent the majority of your career as a PH in Zimbabwe, we're going to talk about how to become a professional hunter, as well as a little bit about the life of an African PH today. So in our previous discussions, you mentioned that being an African dangerous game professional hunter is one of the world's most challenging professions. Please elaborate on why you think that is so, and give us an example that illustrates what you mean.
Yeah, sure, John. Thanks for inviting me back, and I hope I can enlighten your listeners on what it actually takes to become a professional hunter. And I made those comments because I believe that to become a really good professional hunter is the most diverse and the most challenging profession in the world. If you're an airline pilot, all you've got to do is know how to fly an aeroplane. You've got to know how the aeroplane works, and you've got to be able to fly from A to B. If you're an accountant or a CPA, you've got to know how to do a person's books. If you're a pharmacist, you've got to know how to dish out pills and read prescriptions. But with a professional hunter, you've got to know something about everything. And when I was training professional hunters, way back nearly 3 decades ago now, this was the time before the internet and Dr. Google and instantly available knowledge. And one of the things that I insisted that all the learned professional hunters do was to read Time and Newsweek magazine every week. And there was initially quite a bit of resistance to that because they would say, what the heck is reading a Time magazine or a Newsweek magazine got to do with professional hunting? And my answer to that was, it is a vitally important part of your education because you've got to know about what's going on in the rest of the world. Professional hunters are basically entertainers. You've got to take someone that's relatively unknown to you, although you might have similar interests, but your client is invariably older than you, and you've got to take him into the bush, and you've got to be able to communicate with him and talk to him and keep him interested and keep him happy for 30 days, a month, and that is not an easy thing to do. They say the hardest thing a professional hunter ever has to do is to have something to talk about on day 22 of a 21-day safari when you're driving back to the airport of taking your client to the landing strip. And that's a very true statement. You've got to be, a professional hunter has to be worldwide, but you also have this vast knowledge that you cannot accumulate. I mean, it takes you a lifetime to accumulate this vast amount of knowledge. Now, to start off, you've got to know all about the animal species that you're going to hunt. You've got to know everything about those animals in detail, their habits, where they live, how they breed, how they age. You've got to be able to trophy assess all those animals. I mean, you take how many animals there are in Africa. You know, there's some safari areas will have 30 or 40 different species, and you've got to know every one of those species intimately. Also, you've got to know all the grasses, you've got to know all the trees, you've got to know the area's geology, you've got to know the types of soil, you've got to know the history of the area. A PH will also have to have a vast knowledge of firearms and ballistics. I mean, that's probably one of the most crucial aspects of the knowledge that a professional hunter needs. And also, you've got to be able to know how not only how your own firearms and your own calibers of your choice perform, but you also got to know how your client's caliber and cartridge combination is going to perform. And as we have touched on these topics in previous podcasts, but every new bullet type that comes on the market, all these new calibers that keep appearing, PHs, you have to gain that knowledge and be able to know how they're going to perform, which takes a lot of reading and a lot of research and also just a lot of practical knowledge. I mean, you even got to know about the stars because sometimes you're sitting around a campfire and the client will say, well, geez, point out Orion's belt to me, or I'd like to see the Southern Cross. So you've got to know your stars. You've got to know a lot of safaris, there'll also be some fishing involved. So you've got to know about fishing reels and fishers and fishing boats. Photography is a huge part of professional hunting as well. And sometimes clients arrive and have problems with their cameras. So you've got to be able to help them out with their cameras. PH has also got to know about mechanics. He's got to be able to fix his vehicle if it breaks down, but not only his vehicle, the boat, the generators. I mean, masses of different mechanical things. That's all his responsibility to keep running and keep maintained. And then you get to the building aspect of it. You know, sometimes you have to build a camp. You've got to know how to build a building. You've got to know how to fix roads. You've got to know how to fix bridges. got to know about plumbing. You've got to know about electrics to fix the wiring of the camp. And then you've got to know about the history of Africa. And what is also really important is a professional hunter needs to understand why his client has come to hunt. Because in my day, there were basically 4 authors and 4 books which fired up the enthusiasm of the American sport hunter. And you have had to read those books so you can understand the driving force behind what makes Americans dream of coming to hunt in Africa. And that all started with Teddy Roosevelt and his book, The African Game Trails, which was obligatory reading. And then after that came Ernest Hemingway in his book called The Green Hills of Africa, where he describes what the grass smells like in the morning. And if you haven't read that book, you've got no idea where your clients are coming from. Use Enough Gun by Robert Rourke was another book that was obligatory reading because it was a book that really fired up the Americans' love of enthusiasm or fascination with Africa. And then all of Peter Hathaway Capstick's books. In Africa, we called him Slapstick because we thought he was a bit of a farce. But he certainly was a fantastic writer, and his books really fired up America's interests. And then around the campfire, I mean, no campfire is complete without discussions about Karamojo Bell, Frederick Cortes Salou, John Hunter, Stignan, Sanchez Arena, Sutherland, all the great elephant hunters. So if you haven't read those books, you've got nothing to talk about. So being able to have that knowledge of all those authors takes a long time to accumulate. And they say 80% of a hunt is spent either sitting in a vehicle or sitting around a campfire. And that's very true. And during that time when you're sitting in a vehicle or sitting around a campfire, it's extremely embarrassing if there's a stony silence and nobody's got anything to talk about. And I'm sure you've been in situations like that before, John. Mm-hmm. Also, current world affairs. You know, I'm sure every hunting camp or every campfire these days, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I'm sure that's being spoken about, and the use of drones and all this new technology. So if a professional hunter is not up to speed with what's going on in the rest of the world, he is not doing his job. And then also it's extremely important for professional hunters to know something about the country where their clients come from. Luckily, that aspect's quite easy because 80% of the people that come and hunt in Africa, they are American. So we would always ask our students, who won the Super Bowl, tell us, about the different states and just what do you know about America? And it's very important for someone living in Africa to know about where his clients come from. And I was quite proud of the fact that we Africans know a hell of a lot more about America than you Americans know about Africa. That's for sure.
That's definitely true.
Yeah. So the art of communication and how do you learn to be able to communicate? Because most of your clients are wealthy, or they're older. They at retirement. The first thing they do when they retire is treat themselves to an African safari. So they're men of the world. They've been around. They've done lots of things. And you get a 18 or a 20-year-old learner PH is now going to sit down with a surgeon or a person that's had a really successful professional career and talk intelligently to him for 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It is not an easy situation to do. And also to talk sensibly and with knowledge about this vast array of topics, which takes a lifetime or takes at least 4 years to accumulate. And that's why if you wanted to become a CPA or a pharmacist, it takes you probably 4 years to get that degree. And I believe that's the right length of time it should take a person to train as a professional hunter, because it takes you that length of time to acquire this vast amount of knowledge. You know, it's not only that. I mean, the professional hunter, then he also knows how to run the camp. He's got to know all about cooking and supplies and logistics, and how do you make sure the camp doesn't run out of ice, and make sure there's always fresh tomatoes and fresh lettuce in camp, and you're 7 hours from the closest grocery store. So there are a huge number of other logistical problems that it's all the professional hunter's responsibility to tackle. And then you get down to the business side of it. You know, are you making money on the account side of the logistics? I mean, it's just a hugely challenging profession to get right. And I'm fortunate. I'm of the age now where I've met and I've got to know most of the really good PHs in Africa, and they all have one thing in common. They're all highly accomplished men. They're all extremely intelligent. Quite a few of them are left-handed, funnily enough, which tells me quite a bit. And also, there are people that could have done anything, and they could have accomplished anything in their lives. You know, they could have become doctors if they'd wanted to. They were that sort of caliber of person, and it's been a real privilege to get to know them.
Well, let's rewind the clock a little bit. What made you want to become a professional hunter and kind of start down that long path? And about how old were you at the time?
I was probably a lot older than most people, because, you know, most guys coming out of school now, or, you know, their dad was a hunter and they just wanted to get into the profession. So they've sort of been exposed to it for, you know, right from childhood. But I had a completely different approach to the whole aspect of it. I grew up in the coastal town of East London in South Africa. My father was a dentist. My grandfather was a dentist. My brother eventually became an orthodontist. And I don't know, I'm just sure they brought the wrong baby home from the hospital, because right from the word go, I just loved guns, and I just wanted to be in the open. I hated school. I didn't like to be confined. I didn't like to be around lots of people. I liked to be out in the outdoors, and I just have always had this fascination with guns and ballistics. You know, when I was at school, I used to spend my pocket money on buying every copy of Guns and Ammo and Sports Afield and Outdoor Life that I could find, and I was very well acquainted with the great gun writers of the day, Elmer Keith and Jack O'Connor and Warren Page and Jim Carmichael. And because remember, when I was growing up, there was no television. So, and what do? You read. You had to read. And that's one of the sad things about today. I think reading has become a lost art. You know, it's too easy just to put on the TV and watch a YouTube channel hunting video or something like that. But nobody seems to read anymore. But then when I got to Zimbabwe, when I qualified as a veterinarian, and I have told the story before, and Zimbabwe was starting to export beef to Europe, and suddenly there was a Cape buffalo in amongst the herd of cattle that I was responsible for, and I shot this buffalo, and that turned out to be hoof and mouth positive. And yeah, once you've hunted a buffalo, as I've also mentioned before, you are infected for life, and that started me on the quest for learning, for greater knowledge. And the ranches that we lived on, the Zambezi Valley and the Lake Kariba, was only an hour and a half away from the farm that I eventually bought. And our family holidays were spent in the Zambezi Valley. And I was a farmer, so I had a full complement of African staff, and I had a Toyota Land Cruiser, and our surgery assistant became my tracker, our special that I spoke about in the previous podcast. And we would go down and we would set up camp on the banks of the Zambezi, and we would just basically hunt impala. But it was, and that was the basis. And then we used to speak about it, and as I got to know people, and they would say, "Oh, gee, well, I would love to do that. Won't you take me to the Zambezi Valley on a hunting trip?" So that sort of started me on the direction of becoming a professional hunter. Also, I joined an organization called the Zimbabwe Hunters Association. It was just an organization of farmers, mostly farmers and people in Zimbabwe, and they like to hunt. And in those days, the Reefer Safari area, which was the area just upstream from Turundu up to the Kariba Dam wall was known as the Reaper Safari area, and that area was controlled by the Hunters Association. And they had a very unique system where you started out as a D-grade hunter. And then for every dangerous game animal that you hunted, you got 5 points. And when you'd accumulated 50 points, you went to a C grade, and after another 50 points, you went to a B grade, and then after another 50 points, you went to an A grade. And there was a mentorship program where A and B grade hunters used to accompany the C and D grade hunters to teach them about the bush and to teach them about hunting and to teach them about, the mannerisms and how to hunt dangerous game. And I always respected the Rhodesians because they've had this wonderful philosophy of the more you give, the more you get. The knowledge that you gained was given to you freely and generously by your mentors, the people that they themselves had that knowledge passed down to them by the older generation. And it was almost like your duty to pass your knowledge on. And I felt it my duty as a veterinarian, and my love of ballistics and my knowledge of ballistics and my knowledge of animal anatomy and game animal anatomy was to take that knowledge and to pass it on. And that was probably the driving force of writing my books, The Perfect Shot and Nyati and Africa's Most Dangerous. So the professional hunting for me then was just a gradual progression from just starting out a hunting parlor to eventually becoming a fully licensed professional hunter. But that took me 3 years in those days to do that.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about what the process is like becoming a professional hunter in Zimbabwe? And you can talk about what you had to deal with to do it and how things have changed in the years that have passed.
Okay, so in my day, you started out by you would go to the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, and they would give you you could get what you called a study pack, and that was a list of the books that were recommended you need to acquire. It was Robertson's bird book. There were books on Coates Palgrave's books on the trees of Southern Africa. There was a very good booklet called Ballistics in Perspective by Mark LaGrange. They gave you, and you just started. And then there were certain mammal books, Smithers and things like that. So you collected this library of books, and you just basically started working through them. And what you could also do, you could also get the previous learner professional hunters license exam papers. And then basically you sort of figured out what type of questions they would ask you. And then once a year they would have you could go and sit and write your learner professional hunter's license. And there were basically 4 papers. The first paper was called Habits and Habitat. So that was about all the different species and the environment where you would find them. There was a general paper which just covered many different topics regarding the profession. And then there was a paper on firearms and ballistics. And then there was a paper on the law, and that's the important part of all the laws covering the hunting industry. And the minimum pass rate was 60%, and you had to pass all 4 of the papers. And if you didn't, well, then you failed, and you could come back again and write those exams the following year. Once you passed your learner professional hunter's license exam, you were issued with a learner professional hunter's license. And that enabled you then to sign up you had to go and find a tutor. And the tutor was a fully licensed professional hunter who was prepared to take you under his wing and to teach you basically everything that he knew. But with your learner professional hunter's license, you were legally allowed to hunt plains game in a non-dangerous game hunting area. So you could take a client, you could go and hunt a kudu or hunt sort of an antelope species in an area where no dangerous game occurred. But there's also your job then to accompany your tutor on dangerous game hunts where you had to keep a logbook. And every hunt that you went on, you had to, just like a pilot keeps a flying logbook. You had to record exactly what you did every day, and the species you saw, identify the trees, And if you were with a client and the client shot an animal, you would have a photograph of that. You put that in your logbook, and you basically you assembled your logbook as proof of your experience. And I did a year's apprenticeship, but I was probably lucky because I was in my early 30s at that stage of my life, and I'd already, as I'd mentioned before, hunted quite a few buffalo on my own that were coming into the commercial farming area. So I went through my apprenticeship quite quickly, and I was always interested in trees and grasses. So I think I gained my knowledge. I assembled the knowledge that I needed to assemble quickly. And then it was your tutor's decision when he thought that you had enough experience. And during your apprenticeship period, you had to shoot 4 dangerous game animals yourself. That was the requirement, and I believe that is still the requirement today. You have to personally go out and hunt 4 dangerous game animals, and mostly those would be buffalo. But the guys that really like elephant, they organize to go on problem elephant hunts, where they shoot elephants that come in with crop raiders and things like that. So when your tutor thinks that you've assembled enough experience, he recommends that in those days, you used to write what was known as the full license exam. And that was in my day, which was more than 30 years ago now, that was another book exam, another written exam. But that is now changed, and according to Rob Lowry, who's now the current chairman of the Zimbabwe Professional Guards Association, the full license exam is now an oral examination where you sit before a panel of examiners, which was made up of experienced professional hunters from the association and also from the Department of National Parks. And you have to arrive there in your full hunting kit with your hunting vehicle, your rifle, and how you would actually go hunting. And then they sit down and they grill you for a couple of hours and it really becomes very quickly evident whether you know what you're talking about or not. And if you pass that examination, and then you are invited to what is known as the proficiency exam, and that is a week-long examination where I've explained this before, where you have to go and set up a camp in one of the national parks, where we're in the presence of your examiners, and your examiners are actually your clients. So you have to take your examiner as your hunting client, and in his presence you have to hunt either an elephant or a buffalo. You have to bait lions, you have to bait leopards, you have to probably bait crocodiles if you're in an area with water. You have to then shoot at this animal, you have to then prepare it, the trophy, you have to skin it yourself, you have to salt it, you have to do everything yourself. You are not allowed, the only labor you're allowed to have in your camp is your cook, because they don't expect you to do the cooking, and what we call the camp attendant who would make the beds, do the washing, and keep the camp clean. So that is a mini safari where your client is your examiner, and for a week you are just bombarded with every manageable question. And they tell me now that there's only a 25% pass rate.
Oh.
So about only, at the current state of affairs, only between 5 and 8 guys go on the proficiency every year, and only between 1 or 2 of those guys pass every year. So it's about a 25% pass rate. So they've made it extremely difficult, and the association, they just said, listen, this is the best training in Africa. We are the best trained. We're not bragging that we are the best PHs. We are just saying that we are the best trained PHs. And it's quite interesting. If you're a professional guide, which take people on photographic safaris, or if you're going the hunting route, the examination is exactly the same. And prior to that, which I forgot to mention, is you have to pass a shooting test. And the shooting test is done even before you get to the proficiency. When I did my proficiency, we had the shooting test was during the examination. But now they've made it even more difficult, that you have to pass this shooting test or the series of tests before you even, and if you don't pass it, well, you just don't get to go on the course. And what has also changed with now is that you get this, what you call your proficiency shooting certificate, and that only lasts for 2 years. So you have to go and reshoot the shooting test every 2 years. And that applies now to every PH in Zimbabwe. So I can imagine all the old guys my age now, where their eyesight's not so good as it used to, all of a sudden now having to go and do these fire and maneuver shooting tests. And I did explain the one test you do to you some time ago, where you had 3 targets and you had to shoot at 30, shoot at 20, shoot at 10 meters. Well, there's a number of tests like that where you basically it's shooting against the clock. So it's how quickly you shoot, how accurate you shoot, and how proficient you are with your weapon, how well your weapon functions. So, they're really upped the game now, and they've made it an extremely hard-earned qualification is a Zimbabwe professional hunter's license. That's for sure.
Wow, so that's very interesting. I was. One of the questions I was going to ask you was what you needed to do to maintain this certification after you got it. And so that's interesting, where you don't have to it's not just a matter of mailing in your, $500 or something like that to renew your license. You have to take the shooting test and all that stuff every couple of years, huh?
Yeah, and you also, you've got to renew your first aid certificate every 2 years, and you've got to have your medical insurance up to date. So they've made it sort of a lot more difficult to just keep these guys, keep them on their toes, and which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, so even guys like John Sharp are going out there and shooting every couple of years now. Then, huh?
I would hope so. I can hope you can see his sights there. maybe there's a rush on red dot scopes in Zimbabwe at the moment for all the old PSs.
So I had told you previously I hunted Zimbabwe. Gosh, it was but over 10 years now. I was there in 2012, and the professional hunter I was paired with on that hunt with me was his first hunt as a fully certified and licensed professional hunter. And he was telling me about the proficiency exam that he had just taken a couple months previously and everything and all of that stuff. And I could tell that he was still like a little bit traumatized from it and, how difficult it was. And I don't know if he had to take it more than once or anything before he got to that point, but he had taken it and passed it. And, and he was, this was his first job, and it kind of reminded me about a similar idea to the process that I went through as a lieutenant, going through my training after you got my commission, going through the Armor Officer Basic School, and then they got all these lieutenants in there together, and then they're training you how to be a platoon leader and do everything that's involved with it. And you get that final exam where you go out and you take a platoon and you do a mission, and you got the examiners that are there with you, and they're making sure that you deliver your op order appropriately, and they are QCing everything that you do, and they're asking you questions while you're in the middle of this real big stressful operation. And he was saying exactly what you just said about outfitting this hunt for these examiners and go out there, and I think he said that they shot an elephant on theirs, and he was saying that they're out there, he's being his own tracker, and he's walking through the bush, and every so often the examiner will stop him and say, "Hey, what's that tree?" And he'll tell him what the tree is, and you say, "Good." And then they go on, "Hey, what's that grass? What's that bird that just flew by?" Et cetera, et cetera. And it was just constant like that for a week. And then, like you said, they killed the elephant, he skins it, he had to chop the ivory out himself, and they made sure that the ivory was removed from the elephant appropriately without being damaged, et cetera, et cetera. But like you said, he was a very well-trained, confident guy. He was only 23. And so he was, you could definitely tell that it was not your normal 23-year-old that you would just pick off the street somewhere.
What is his name, John?
Andreas Coetzee.
Okay, and I've heard of him. Yeah.
He works for Pete Fick now in the Booby Valley.
It is a qualification that one can be very proud of, that's for sure. Yeah. But I also felt to him on that proficiency exam, if you pass the exam, doesn't mean you come away with a full license. There are certain restrictions. As I've explained when I did my proficiency, because I went through that exam twice. I remember I ended up shooting a cardboard box the first time because there were no elephants. And I ended up with a restriction, what they called a B restriction. Well, I mean, I could hunt buffalo, leopard, lion, and plains game, but I couldn't hunt elephants. So you can you can just get a C restriction where you're just allowed to hunt buffalo and plains game. And then as you gain more and more experience, the examiners feel that, no, you're competent on buffalo, but your leopard baiting skills need a bit of work, they can give you a restricted license, and then you can gradually, with time, work towards getting your restriction lifted. And the ultimate goal eventually is to come away with what they call a full license, where you can hunt all the different species. So just because you pass the proficiency doesn't necessarily mean that you come away with a full license. So it is a qualification that is well deserved and has a wonderful reputation. And my hats off to the Zimbabweans, even though that country's got terrible economic times, that these guys have stuck it out and have maintained those standards, and I give them all credit for that.
Now, you mentioned briefly that there are hunting guides that are guides, safari guides, that are different from professional hunters. And I know oftentimes that if someone that doesn't know any better will refer to a professional hunter as a guide, it'll kind of make them upset sometimes because it's not the same thing. Can you explain what that difference is?
Well, the situation seems to have changed since I was in Zimbabwe as well, because it's not, in my day, there was Zimbabwe Professional Hunters and Guides Association. Now they've changed that to the Zimbabwe Professional Guides Association. So they seem to sort of blended the two. A guide would be someone that would, in my day, would take photographic tourists on a photographic safari, on a walking photographic safari. And a professional hunter would be someone that would take a client to actually go and hunt an animal. But they're now saying that, no, a professional hunter is someone that goes and kills animals himself professionally. But they say, so it's all now, they're now referring to them as professional guides. I know in Namibia, they have what they call a hunting guide, and my understanding of that would be someone with like a learner professional hunter's license, where you would enable them to go and hunt plains game in a non-dangerous game area. So there seems to be a little bit of a change in terminology that I wasn't really aware of, because, as I said, I got my license in nearly 30 years ago now. So things have changed a little bit.
Yeah, Andreas was saying that, at least at the time, and once again, this was over 10 years ago now, that the guides took some of the same training but did not have to go through all of the examinations that professional hunters did. And so it was viewed as a lesser level of certification, if I understood him right anyway.
Yeah, on my understanding, talking to Rob Lurie today, that has now changed. But if you're a guide, or you're a photographic walking safari guide, or you're a professional hunter, you do exactly the same. There's no have to shoot the tag. All the PHs now have to know all the trees, all the birds. Now, in my day, they said the PH only had to know 4 trees. You had to have a baobab, a bait tree, and a shade tree, and a firewood tree. But that was the standing joke. But no, that seems to have changed now. Now they've really upped their game, and everybody, if you belong to that association, everybody has to do the same exam, pass the same course, do it. All the knowledge is exactly the same.
You know, there's a saying that all of the West Pointers that may be listening to this podcast know, called the Corps has. All of the people that graduated from West Point, even you graduate last year, you're an old grad, and you talk about the Corps. Corps' gone to hell, right? It's just gotten easier and easier. These kids these days, they don't have to do anything. It was so much harder for us.
Everybody's getting soft.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's the opposite, though, with the professional hunters in Zimbabwe, though.
Yes, definitely. I think they really upped their game.
You graduate. You pass your proficiency exam, you get some sort of a certification, maybe a restricted license, maybe a full license, whatever. At that point, you're able to guide at least some hunts. And so at that point, you could go get a job for a big outfitter, I guess. You could become a freelance professional hunter, or you could be your own outfitter. I guess that the 3 different paths that guys can take at that point.
That's correct. Yeah. So I had, as I explained, we were taking our annual holidays, setting up a camp on the Zambezi and going to hunting parlor and stuff like that. So we had all the equipment. So then you apply to Department of National Parks for an outfitter's license. And that involves you being inspected So I had to do is set up a whole safari camp on the front lawn of my ranch, on the lawn of my ranch house in Zimbabwe. We had, and then they come out and they inspect it. They inspect your vehicle, they inspect your tents, they inspect all your fridges, your deep freeze. You get your cook to cook them a meal, so you know exactly what's going on. And then eventually, if they're happy with that, and you explain how you're going to, even have to have bags of salt, how you're going to prepare the trophies. You have to have a book where you can record your trophies. And they basically come and inspect your camp, and they inspect your vehicles, they inspect your rifles. And if they satisfy them that you have the ability to set up a safari camp, then you would issued with an outfitter's license, and then you were obliged to join it. In those days, it was called ZATSO. It was the Zimbabwe Association of Tour and Safari Operators. So you became a member of that, as well as a member of the Zimbabwe Professional Hunters and Guides Association. And that enabled you. And I was in those days, the Nyakasanga and the Sapi safari areas were not concession areas. They were retained by the Department of National Parks, and then the department had an auction system where they would auction off hunting packages in those two areas. And my business was involved around purchasing those hunts for my clients. So you'd go to the auction, you'd get your client to say, okay, this is what I want to hunt a buffalo, and I want to hunt a leopard, and this is what I want to hunt. And you'd figure the dates where he wanted to hunt them. He'd wire you the money, and then you would go to this auction with a whole bunch of US dollars in your pocket, and then you would bid on a hunt. And once you'd bought the basic hunt, so the basic hunt was normally a buffalo bull and 5 or 6 impala and maybe a couple of birds. Once you purchased a hunt, then you could purchase additional animals. You could purchase everything from elephant, lion, leopard, crocodile, hippo, and you could build up the bag as and when your client wanted. And those hunts were normally, some hunts were 10 days, and most of the hunts were 14 days in length. And what we would do then, my safari business, was the client would arrive, pick him up in Harare. You'd come out to my farm. He'd spend a day getting over his jet lag, day or two, and we'd be on the farm. We'd go and hunt some birds. And then we'd pack up a 10-ton lorry with all our safari kit, all the tents and the deep freezers and everything. And we used to fill up a 10-ton truck. And then my safari crew, which was about 8 guys, from the cook and the waiter and my 2 tractors and the skinner and the mechanic, we'd all climb onto this truck, and I would tow a boat, and we'd all drive down into the Zambezi Valley, and then we'd set up a camp on the banks of the Zambezi. And it was a full-on camp, proper beds and deep freezers and lights. Set up the whole day to set up this camp, and then we'd hunt for 10 days, or if it was a 14-day hunt for 14 days, and then pack it all down and drive it all back to the ranch. The next day, take your clients to the airport, and then your safari crew would go through and fix everything that got broken and repaint what needed to be repainted, and then a couple of weeks later, we'd do it all again. And I used to do 1 hunt a month for the 5 months of the hunting season, so May, June, July, August, and September, or April, May, June, July, August. I would basically do 1 hunt a month for those periods. That was sort of my business, was based on that. So I never owned a concession as such. But then gradually that has now all changed. The Department of National Parks do not offer those hunts anymore. The Nyakasanga has been bought by a safari, or has become a concession owned by a concession holder, and then and the Sapi is now gone out of it. It's been purchased by people that have got into the non-consumptive hunting. So it's become a non-consumptive hunting area, which is unfortunate, but basically that's how my business worked, and it was fantastic. And Kath, my wife, she used to run the camp, so it was really nice that my wife was involved in the operation, because one of the things that we talk about being a professional hunter, professional hunting and a successful, happy marriage and family life is one of the very difficult things to blend together. Most PHs will hunt between 150 and 200 days a year. That means you're away from home for 2/3 of the year, just about. And it's not easy on married life and with kids and stuff like that to be a professional hunter. It's one of the downfalls of professional hunting is it's very hard to balance a happy family life with being a professional hunter.
Yes, I can imagine. So it's not at all hard to imagine. And, if you were doing one 14-day hunt for 5 months a year, that was quote unquote only 70 days a year gone just with clients and whatnot. And that's on the low end for, like you said, compared to 200 days. And even 70 days away from home is a heck of a lot of time when you got little kids and you have your farm to take care of and your veterinary practice and all of that stuff.
Yeah, but I also did a bit of freelancing as well. Living in the Zambezi Valley, there were, the whole Zambezi Valley was basically one big various hunting concessions. And it was a malaria area, and PHs were often coming down with malaria. And quite often you would just get a phone call to say, hey, man, I've got a client flying in tomorrow and my PH has just had to be casevaced out. He's got malaria. Can you just come down and just do a 7-day buffalo hunt for me quickly, And so it was like that. So I also did a bit of freelance hunting. And that was really nice to be able to get to see areas that you wouldn't normally see. I hunted in the Ome, I hunted in the Teresa Safari area, I hunted in the Siderera Forest Reserve, I did hunts in Matetse. So I hunted most of the safari hunting areas in Zimbabwe on basically just freelance hunts as well, which was wonderful. Now, but you've got to have an understanding why to do something like that.
Well, what sort of hunting activities require a professional hunter to be present? Because it sounded like when you were talking at the beginning, at least Zimbabwe residents could do certain hunts, like in the Zambezi Valley, just go out there and just hunt impala, whatever.
If you're a foreigner, if you're a non-resident, say you coming to Zimbabwe and you're going on a hunt, you've got to be accompanied by a licensed professional hunter. There's no way that you could just go in and come and hunt, without the services of a PH. Mm-hmm. So the guys without the locals, if you were a farmer and you wanted to go and hunt impala in the Zambezi Valley and you bought an impala hunt, you didn't have to have a PH with you. But if you were a foreigner and you came in on a foreign passport and you had to go through customs, all that, and you were going out to hunt, then you had to be accompanied by a licensed professional hunter.
Now, were Zimbabwe residents allowed to hunt dangerous game and whatnot without a professional hunter?
Yes, through that Zimbabwe Hunters Association. But as I explained, but those guys then had to be accompanied by a mentor. The D-grade hunter had to go and hunt with an A or a B-grade hunter to teach them what to keep them safe and to watch their back.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic system. And my tutor, the guy that my professional hunting tutor, I was very fortunate that he was the CEO of the Zimbabwe Hunters Association, a guy by the name of Charles Krobler. And quite often, and I lived in Kroy, I was only an hour away from the Reefer Safari area, and I had my trackers, and he would often say to me, hey, Kevin, there's just 2 young farm managers, they've drawn a buffalo hunt, and please can you just go down and just help them with a buffalo. So I would zip down, and in 5 days we'd hunt a buffalo, and so I got a lot of extra hunting like that, which was fantastic, and also good training for myself and for my tracker to be able to go and help young guys with their first buffalo hunts.
In situations like that, where you were going and helping someone out with a buffalo hunt, were they paying you for your time and your services?
No. This was the old Zimbabwe, the more you give, the more you get type of thing, Mm-hmm. It was just a free excuse to go on a buffalo hunt, Free. I mean, I'd jump at that with both hands, with both feet. No, only if you were employed by another, if you went and freelance for another safari company, then they would pay you a daily rate. Mm-hmm. And I see that's one of your questions, and that's quite interesting. I asked 2 of my professional hunter friends in Zimbabwe today, what is the daily rate if you're going to employ a guy with his own vehicle and his own trackers to come and do a freelance hunt, and they pay you $250 a day, which was the same as it was 20 years ago. I mean, that hasn't changed. And boy, if you're a freelance professional hunter and you're doing 200 days. Well, you're getting 200 days at $250 a day, which is not a hell of a lot. When you still got to run your vehicle, and you still got to pay your trackers as well on top of that. So the saying goes out, and both my friends that I spoke to today said the professional hunters rely heavily on their tips. Their tips is basically their profit. And tipping is a very controversial topic in the safari world. Some countries, some nationalities don't tip. The Americans normally tip very generously, but from a poor PH's point of view, where he's surviving on $250 a day, and remember, he only works for 200 days a year, so the year is 365 days long. How does he survive for those other days when he's not hunting? So it is a profession that you do for the love of the excitement and the thrill of it, but you don't get rich being a professional hunter, that's for sure.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that a lot of people that are on the other side of things, say an American client going over there, you're paying a daily rate to do this hunt, and then you're also paying trophy fees on what you end up shooting. But like you said, the PH, for the most part, isn't seeing any of that trophy fee money that you're getting. He's just getting paid his daily rate, whatever the client shoots or not. And if the guy has a great hunt and he's a nice guy, then he tips well. But it's, he's getting paid the same if the guy, shoots one thing versus 8 animals.
Oh, for sure. So that's why many of the professional hunters go the outfitter route, and they become their own outfitter. But they don't have a concession, but they start assembling their own client list, and then they would then go and buy hunts from an established safari operator. There are some areas like the Booby, the Sabi, where they have huge areas, and guys would then go in there, and then they would buy part of the quota from a big concession, and then so they're not working for an established safari operator. They then become their own safari operators, and then that's how they charge then the $1,000 a day daily rate, but you have to pay for the camp and all that. So it's not many people get extremely rich out of professional hunting, that's for sure. There are really good operators that do really well and have this really elite clientele, but the majority of guys, I think it's a bit of a hand-to-mouth existence for a wonderful laugh. But the nice thing about it is, and I've got to the stage now, I'm 67, and I'm too old to become a too dangerous game PH anymore. It's so your reactions slow down, and you don't hear as well, you don't see as well, and basically it's an age limit when you can't be a pilot anymore because you're too old, and there's also an age limit when you can't become a dangerous game PH anymore because you're just too damn old.
My dad was a pilot, and he told me with all the studies that they did on aircraft safety and whatnot that there were 2 distinct points in a pilot career where a pilot is likely to have an accident. And one, I can't remember the number of hours it was. Maybe it was 2,000, 2,500 hours, something like that, where the person is still somewhat new being a pilot, but they're at that point where they're starting to get some confidence and maybe a little bit overconfident, and then they make a mistake like that. And then if they make it through there without getting themselves killed, they're good for a good amount of time. And then towards the end of the career at, say, 10,000 plus hours, your risks of an accident start really going up again. Because like you said, at that point, you're getting older, physical capabilities are declining, et cetera, et cetera. Have you seen something that mirrors that with professional hunters getting killed or injured in the line of duty?
Well, PHs definitely get killed in the line of duty, and there's definitely that overconfidence factor in it. I went through that myself, and I thought I was invincible at some stage. And then you have a few incidents where you say, geez, that was pretty close. And then especially when you got young kids, and then you sort of suddenly realize that you were young and stupid and foolish, or you definitely got overconfident. Yeah, for sure. I know I've been that route before, but I quickly learned to become a lot more cautious. And thank God I was never injured in the course of duties. And some PHs go through their whole careers that never get scratched. I mean, I think old Harry Selby hunted for 53 seasons, and I mean he was never injured at all. And then I know some very well-known and very famous PHs that many of them have had incidents where they've been mauled by leopards or gored by buffalo, and they've survived it, but definitely they've had incidents where they've come second. And it can happen at any time, that's why they call it dangerous game hunting. Sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're just unlucky. But a few PHs do get killed every year, mostly by buffalo. I had a friend of mine, or also a guy that I knew, was killed when an elephant shot an elephant and it fell on top of him and it squashed him. So these accidents do occur, but they're not. If you think how many, currently there are 150 PHs operating in Zimbabwe at this point in time. That's full-time PHs, and if anybody gets gored or something like that, I mean, everybody hears about it, and you probably have one incident every second year or so. So I mean, it's a very low incident of guys actually being really hurt, and then to be killed is even a lower incident than that. Mm-hmm. So although it is a dangerous game, I think with the level of training, certainly with the level of PHs, that it's not as often as one would think, in my opinion.
And so, you mentioned the guy that had the elephant fall on him. I think I've heard that exact story. It happened.
Yeah, I think his name was Robertson. Yeah.
Yeah. You have talked in the past about the fact that leopards account for something like 85% of all injuries inflicted upon people on a hunt, PHs or otherwise. And you also mentioned that buffalo are responsible for a lot of these incidents with people getting killed and whatnot. But there's also just kind of weird off-the-wall things that happen too. Every now and then you'll have someone that gets killed in a car accident, or the guy last year in South Africa that people think was murdered. It's just when you're spending a lot of time on the road, especially on some of the quality of roads that you got in Africa, I'm sure car accidents are not uncommon.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the roads seem to be getting worse and worse. No, but I mean that's life. But driving, people die on the highways here in the United States, so these things sort of happen. The very odd one gets bitten by a guy bitten by a snake and things like that. But those are very rare. It doesn't happen all that often, and it's certainly not. The incident doesn't warrant people not coming to Africa because they might get killed. It's called dangerous game hunting for a reason. But in theory, if you do it properly and you've got a good pH, the chances of being injured are minuscule.
And just off the top of my head, just us talking right now, I can think of a number of people that are either retired professional hunters, like you, did not get seriously injured or killed in the line of duty. Tuki van der Merwe was he was the outfitter that I hunted with in Zimbabwe. I think he's either retired or semi-retired now. John Sharp is still working, but he's been at it for a while. Even Mark Sullivan, who went out of his way to provoke charges from animals, didn't get killed. He's out of that business now, and so it's certainly one of these things where it is definitely dangerous. People die, people get killed, or people get injured doing it. But a lot of it's also not at all unusual to have people go 30, 40 years and no issues at all, if you're careful.
Yes, I agree.
Now, let's see here. We've talked a little bit about the different hunting areas and things of that nature. You've referenced concessions. Concessions is a word that gets thrown around a lot in safari speak that I think a lot of people, especially Americans, don't know what the heck it means. So can you explain what that is and how someone goes about getting a hunting concession?
So hunting concession is an area that is owned by the government and it's controlled by the Department of National Parks and Wildlife Management. And it will be known as a safari hunting area, and then those concessions come up for auction. And then interested parties can bid on to buy the concession. You have to be a Zimbabwe resident or a permanent resident or a Zimbabwe citizen to be able to bid on that. And the concession would normally be minimum of 5 years. and it comes with an annual quota. So you'd say, okay, and you sit down and you can pencil out what you can sell those hunts for, and then you can figure out basically what you can afford to pay for that concession. Some of them come with a rollover, and in the past, that was one of the problems with us holding a concession for too short a period of time, is that invariably the safari company that bought the concession overpaid. They were just desperate to get it, and they paid more than it was really worth, so they would then go in and we used to say rape the concession. Shooters should overshoot it, or try and convince the department to give them a bigger quota so they had more animals to hunt, so they could make more money to try and cover their costs. The tendency these days is to find the right operators that are really dedicated and put the infrastructure into the concessions, and then you get that concession for 20 years. And then if you got it for 20 years, then you can develop the concession. Because with independent Zimbabwe, what has happened, the game department basically run out of funds, got no funds for fuel or for tires, and so their management of those areas is not as good as it was in the past, so that the management and the anti-poaching of the concession now falls onto the shoulders of the operator. So the operators actually become, in theoretically, in inverted commas, the game department, where they manage the concession, they do the anti-poaching, they support the communities within the concession. And the perfect example of this is Charlton McCullum Safari. They've got the Dandy Safari area. And if you follow them, they've got a thing called DAPU, the Dandy Anti-Poaching Unit. And just how well they manage that area is just an absolute, I just admire them. And it's just an absolute model of how hunting pays for conservation. They even introduce new species, put in boreholes, put on solar panels, build schools, build clinics, train the staff, run an anti-poaching operation, and that concession is absolutely thriving. So you just got to admire them for doing a fantastic job. The other thing, it's a concession that belongs to the government, and also you have what you call communal concessions. So there's a thing called Campfire, stands for Communal Areas Management for Indigenous Resources. So these are areas that belong to the indigenous people, and every area would have a council, what we call it the rural council. And in those concessions, the safari operators, if they're hunting in a campfire area, they would go to the council with a proposal. So say, okay, I would like to take over the quota of this concession, and this is what I'm prepared to do. I'm going to build you a clinic. I'm going to build you a school. I'm going to employ so many people. This is what the trophy fees that you charge. I'll give you so much of the money back. I'll make sure that you get the meat. And then those dealings are done with the council. It's got nothing to do with an auction system. That is on a tender system. So people will then put in tenders, and then they are beholden, responsible to the council to keep up their bargain, to keep up the side. If you say you're going to build a clinic, well, then the council is going to make sure that you do it. And then the funds that you pay then go to the council, and then that goes to running the area, to maintaining the roads, to paying for the nurses that run the clinic, they're paying for the teachers that run the schools, books for the schools. So they're basically two different systems. And then you would have privately owned areas, like the two privately owned areas would be the Savi Conservancy and the Boobie Valley Conservancy. This is privately owned land. That's where old cattle ranches were consolidated into huge big areas, 1 million acres or more, and then operators will then operate within the Savi Conservancy or the Boobie Conservancy. So an operator would go in there and he would buy, like John Sharp. John Sharp hunts in the Boobie Conservancy, for example. So he'd have a quota from them, and he would use their camps, and he'd do all his own marketing, but he would then have a fixed quota purchased from within that conservancy, which he could then go and market.
So in all of these cases, either on private land in the campfire area or in just the regular government concessions, the safari operators are usually leasing a specific parcel of land from whoever runs the area. And so they have exclusive hunting rights in that area that allow them for a certain number of years that's pre-agreed upon to shoot X number of animals during that time. They pay whatever the agreed upon amount of money is, and then they mark that stuff up and turn around and sell it to clients from elsewhere.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it all works.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fairly complicated business, and then you've got to do your sums. You've got to pencil it out really carefully, to make sure that at the end of the day you make a profit. But ultimately, the money that the clients bring in to these concessionaires areas, whether it's private or it's council or it's government, that's the money that goes to maintaining and running these areas. So I see now that the UK just banned the importation of trophy fees into the UK, which is just absolutely crazy because it's the hunting, it's the dollars generated by hunting which keep these areas wild, keep these areas free of poachers, and keep them pristine as true wilderness areas. If the hunting had to stop, there are not enough photographic tourists to take up that slack. Some of these areas are wonderful for hunting, but they're not the world's greatest photographic areas. They people that go to photographic areas want to see the big five every day and stuff like that. So there are certain areas of the country which are much more attractive for photographic safaris, but a lot of the safari hunting areas are less beautiful from an aesthetic point of view, but that doesn't mean that they don't offer fantastic hunting for the species that occur there naturally. So hunting is, you've said many times before, hunting is a vital economic engine that drives conservation in Africa. And unfortunately, the bleeding hearts of the greenies just do not see that. And they don't see the fact that the hunting is supporting all these people that live on the fringes, that they spend their daily life in conflict with these animals. And the only reason they tolerate these animals is because that they know that they're deriving an income from those animals in the form of a job or for a school for their kids to go to or meat on a regular basis. You take that hunting out of that, and that all just disappears. Those people, just to survive, are then forced to start poaching. So it's a ludicrous situation, and this is nothing new. I mean, we've been preaching this for decades, but people just don't they don't want to listen to it. They listen to the bleeding hearts.
Yes, that's an unfortunate thing. For the listener, I have an article on this exact deal that actually talks about Booby Valley a little bit in more detail. I'll put in the show notes. You can check it out and learn more about it. We've covered almost everything, Kevin, that I wanted to cover tonight. I guess the only other thing would be, while you did most of your professional hunter career in Zimbabwe, you have hunted other places as well. Was it just a very simple matter, say, when you were hunting in Mozambique, that you just say, hey, I had a Zimbabwe professional hunter license, and then they issue a Mozambique license?
The hunting in these other different countries, you can't get a license there until you get a residence permit. Mm-hmm. So I know a lot of Americans would love to come and do a PH course and then come and hunt, but you cannot become a licensed hunter in any country unless you've got a residence permit. So I had to get a residence permit in Mozambique, and that was good enough. There was no official licensing when I was in Mozambique in 2007. There was no official licensing sort of process in those days. So my Zimbabwe professional hunter's license was good enough for me to be issued with a Mozambique professional hunter's license. When I was in South Africa, they would not recognize my PH license, and I had to go and do a 10-day wonder South African PH course to get a Eastern Cape professional hunter's license, which was a bit of a joke, but we won't go down that route.
Did you get a license in Namibia as well? Did you ever hunt there?
No, I never hunted in Namibia. I was in Namibia for 3 years, but then you would have to then go and write all the Namibian exams. And that's what quite a few Zimbabweans will hunt in Tanzania. And in Tanzania, we just had when I was at the Wildlife College, we had a PH course, and one of our students from that, he's just gone and written the Tanzania professional hunter's license exams, and he's now got his Tanzania professional hunter's license. Quite a few of these professional hunters will go and hunt in countries like Cameroon and all these other, Uganda and places like that. And most of those, they will then just team up with a locally licensed PH to officially do the hunt. Although they do the hunting themselves, they're under the auspices of a locally qualified professional hunter.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, that seems to be kind of a common deal that is interesting about the residency permit. So that's how they get around that then, huh?
Yeah, you've just got to get a residence permit. And, certainly like in South Africa, or to try and, like for a foreigner to come and try and hunt legally in Zimbabwe, I think would be almost impossible, because you could not do it without having to do it legally, you'd have to become a resident, and that's not easy.
All right, fair enough. Now, can you one last time recap how long it took you from the day you started going through the process to actually get your full certification as a professional hunter in Zimbabwe?
Well, it took me 3 years to get a restricted license and then 4 years to get a full license. So it took me 4 years. And
what is typical today, you think?
Now, today, well, the guy told me today that it takes 4 years. It's a 4-year deal now.
Okay. Is that a done by statute where it has to take 4 years, or is that just how long it takes guys to do it?
Yeah, that's just basically how long it takes you to get the knowledge that you need to acquire to pass all those exams. And it's your apprenticeship. But I think it used to be guys could do it in 3 years, but I think now that they've made it quite a bit harder. Rob said to me today that most guys are taking 4 years to do it.
All right. And so during that time where you're an apprentice professional hunter, you are working with a fully licensed professional hunter, assisting him on his hunts, and just kind of gaining this knowledge and whatnot under his wing while you're getting ready to take your exam and learn the things you need to know then, huh?
That's right. And they call you a gopher. And that means go and fetch the vehicle, go and fetch firewood. You just do all the horrible jobs, If you shoot a crocodile and the crocodile sinks into the Zambezi, well, it's the apprentice that has to dive in and retrieve it, And if you shoot a buffalo and the Land Cruiser's 5 miles away, well, it's the professional hunter's job to go and get the Land Cruiser and cut a road in. You just get all the horrible jobs,
And
that's why you call it gopher,
And you're not really allowed to operate on your own at that point. You can't be taking a client out by yourself or anything. It always has to be under the supervision of a fully licensed PH then.
You can take a client out for plains game in a non-dangerous game area.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only time you're allowed to operate on your own. If you're a guide, not a hunting, you can do it like a driving safari. You're not allowed to get out of the vehicle and walk, but you could certainly take someone in a game drive and things like that. But and all the other time, you're under the auspices of your tutor. And that's quite a responsibility. And, you've got to admire the tutors for putting up with someone. Sometimes these kids can be quite irritating because you're always around. You're in the kitchen making sure that the cook doesn't run out of food, and you're making sure that the punch is being fixed, and you're in the skinning shed to make sure that the skinner is doing his job properly. So you're just a general dog's body. You just get to learn the profession from doing everything yourself. And I also, when I had apprenticeships as well, because I was very grateful for Charles Crockett was affording me the time and to pass his knowledge on to me. And in that sort of situation, you feel almost obliged when you've got to the stage where you now fully qualified and experienced is to share that knowledge with the next generation, because it's what's the right word? It's a passing down of I don't know.
Well, passing the torch,
it's passing the torch. That's what it is. It's passing the torch, and the knowledge that I gained, I was given for free, and it was my obligation to pass that knowledge on freely to the next generation. And I admire the Zimbabweans for that. I know I've got a a Namibian professional hunter. He's also dangerous game PH, and he couldn't find anybody to become apprentice to. The guys that they wanted to said no, they were going to charge him for that. And he eventually went to Tanzania. He found an operator in Tanzania, and he went and apprenticed in Tanzania. But in Zimbabwe, there was no even mention of money changing hands. Because you would actually work for if you were going to be an apprentice in a safari company, they would give you an absolute minimum wage. I mean, it's just basically just above survival pay. But you would, and that was and you worked to gain the knowledge that you needed to get your full license. And then when you got your full license, then the situation changes. Then you're fully employable as that young PH that you hunted with. He was now fully PH, and he was very proud of it. And now you could start earning money and start developing his own career. Mm-hmm. And you start developing a reputation, because in the professional hunting industry, it's all about your reputation. Reputation takes you a lifetime to develop a reputation, but you can lose your reputation in the blink of an eye if you do something stupid or something goes badly wrong.
Yes, definitely so. Well, I think that is a good place to wrap it up tonight. Is there anything you'd like to say as in closing?
No, I think that's just about covers it, John. I hope your listeners have a better understanding about what it takes to be a PH and to fork out those tips generously when they realize that what it's like to be a professional hunter, where you rely on tips to put food on the table.
Whew. Isn't that the truth? Well, I enjoyed this as always, and it's always a cool deal to get someone to pull the curtain back a little bit and see what things are like in that other side that foreign hunters don't necessarily get to see. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us about that tonight.
It's a pleasure, John. I hope your listeners found it interesting.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. This is the 15th interview that I have done with Kevin for the podcast. And so he and I have spent literally hours talking to each other about various hunting topics in Africa. And this interview was actually one of my favorites because it's just a sort of thing that you don't hear a lot of other places. And like I said, it's always cool to get a peek behind the curtain and see what things are like, all the sort of stuff that goes into becoming a professional hunter, getting a place to hunt, and actually putting on that hunt. It's a whole lot of hard work that goes into it, a whole lot of training. And like you said, very, very few people are actually able to pass all of the tests and gain the necessary certifications to have an unrestricted professional hunter's license in Zimbabwe. I think he said there's only about 155 professional hunters in Zimbabwe at this instant, and only a couple guys per year get a new license. So it's a very small and exclusive club. And like he talked about as well, this is a situation where there's a whole lot more that goes into being a good professional hunter and a successful outfitter than just going out there and shooting a buffalo or shooting an impala or whatever it is that you are after. There's the whole logistical side of things. You have to run the business side of things to ensure that you're paying everyone, all of your staff appropriately, and at the same time making enough money to earn a good living and support your family doing this. At the same time, there's all sorts of other things that go into it as far as skills a professional hunter needs to have. You need to have a good working knowledge of machines to fix things, especially, say, your Land Cruiser or something like that may get broken or get stuck or something while on safari, which is a very common occurrence. Need to have some medical knowledge to treat everything ranging from minor to potentially much more serious injuries that happen from time to time on a hunt. Need to be able to manage all of the staff that you have, the cook, the trackers, the skinners, all of those people. Make sure that you're hiring the right people, ensuring that they are trained appropriately in not only their job, but in dealing with the clients. And then, of course, there's the whole client interface side of things. You need to be just a person that's easy to get along with, that you can make a conversation with a wide range of people from very different backgrounds from you. Need to be a psychiatrist for some of those people as well, too. All kinds of things happen out in the bush on a hunt, especially when you're spending a ton of time together, by yourself, like as is often common with that. And like I said, there's, of course, all in addition to the actual hunting side of things. I've been on a number of guided hunts in different places in the world, and same thing with fishing charters too. And I distinctly remember going on one charter with my wife many years ago, where we went out with this guy, and he was an incredibly skilled fisherman. He knew exactly where to go, put us in the right spot, set us up for success, and we caught a lot of really great fish on that trip. But the guy was super weird and was terrible at conversations, and the things he just wanted to talk about, he was just different. He was just off, and it was notwithstanding all the fish we caught, and I enjoyed spending time on the water with my wife and catching all of those fish. But the guy was just weird, and I did not enjoy being with him. And that was only on a 3 or 4 hour fishing charter that we went on. And I'm really glad I didn't have to spend 1, 2, 3 weeks alone in the bush with that guy, because that would have been terrible. So that's a good example of the importance of all that other stuff that kind of goes into it, especially that customer interface side. Because like Kevin said, yeah, you got to be a good hunter and that sort of thing and be able to put on a successful and safe hunt for your client. But you also got to have really good social skills and be able to manage that side of things well. And the really good professional hunters, regardless of where they got their training or where they currently hunt, they have that combination of that rare combination of skills that we referenced in this episode. So I hope we did a good job of explaining all of the stuff that goes into that, how to get your certification, and just why it is such a challenging career path and why it's such an exclusive club for those that are able to get their full certifications and do that, especially in Zimbabwe. Now, like Kevin mentioned, there are certain books that just really seem to awaken within people a desire to hunt Africa. There are many books that do that, but like he said, the ones that really seem to be the most popular are African Game Trails by President Theodore Roosevelt, Green Hills of Africa by Ernest Hemingway, Use Enough Gun, and Horn of the Hunter by Robert Rourke. Use Enough Gun is out of print now, but you can still get it. But Horn of the Hunter is still in print, and it's a lot easier to get. I have both of them. I've read both of them, and I really enjoyed them. And then, of course, all the stuff by Capstick. My favorite book by him is Death in the Long Grass. Those, like I said, those are not the only really good books about hunting in Africa, but they are some of the most popular and some of my favorites as well. I've written an article about some of the best Africa hunting books. All of those books I just mentioned, plus some other ones, are on that list. So click the link in the show notes and you can check out that article, pick up copies of the titles that you don't already have, and then you can look at some of the other ones as well. There's a lot of really good, entertaining, and well-written books on that list that really should appeal to people that listen to this podcast that are also interested in hunting in Africa. Now, also, when Kevin and I were talking about the various hunting concessions and the way you can get a concession and how they're allocated in Zimbabwe, we mentioned the campfire system there, and I mentioned that I hunted in a campfire area in Zimbabwe. I've written an article on the conservation benefits of hunting. Once, as always, link is in the show notes, and I talk a little bit about the campfire system there. Check out that article to learn more about how things work, the benefits of hunting in general, etc. Like I said earlier, click the link in the show notes and you can buy a copy of The Perfect Shot 2 and It Shouldn't Happen, where you can hear some of Kevin's other entertaining stories and close calls from over the years. Those are great books. I know there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that have not bought one or the other, so make sure that you fix that today. You're going to really enjoy them, and plus that's also a great way to say thank you to Kevin for donating so many hours of his time to join us on the podcast and talk to us about this stuff. To hear some of his other stories and that he talked about on other appearances on the podcast, you can click any one of the other links that are in the show notes, and it'll take you straight to that episode. And click the final link in the show notes on huntingguns101.com to make sure you are on my email list. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.